Friday afternoon, 1972, the foreman walks down the factory floor with a metal box under his arm. Every man stops what he's doing, not because they're told to, because they know what's inside that box. Cash, real money. And in a few minutes, they'll hold an entire week of their life in their hands. The weight of Friday back in the day, Friday wasn't just another day of the week. It was the day, the one you worked toward, the one your family waited for. And if you grew up in that era, you know exactly what I mean. See, in 1972, most factory workers didn't get a paycheck you had to take to the bank. They got cash, real paper money, handed to them in a small manila envelope with their name typed on the front. No direct deposit, no waiting for funds to clear, just bills you could count with your own fingers. And that made Friday feel different. You'd wake up knowing that by 3 o'clock, you'd have money in your pocket. Not a promise, not a number on a screen, actual dollars. The kind that rustled when you folded them, the kind that smelled like ink and paper and work. That feeling, it's hard to explain to someone who's never experienced it. But if you lived it, you never forgot it. But here's the thing most people don't realize. That pay envelope wasn't just about money. It was part of something bigger. A ritual that shaped how families lived, how bills got paid, and how a man saw himself. And it all started the moment the foreman called your name. The ritual begins, picture this. It's Friday, around 2:45 in the afternoon. The machines are still running, but the rhythm changes. Men start glancing toward the main aisle. The foreman appears, metal box in hand, a clipboard tucked under his arm. He doesn't rush. He never rushes on payday. He stops at the first station, calls out a name. The worker walks over, signs the sheet, and takes his envelope. No small talk, just a nod. Maybe a "see you Monday." Then the next name. This went on for maybe 30-40 minutes, depending on the size of the crew. And during that time, the whole factory had a different energy, quieter, more focused, like everyone was holding their breath just a little. When your name got called, you didn't tear that envelope open right there. No, you slipped it into your back pocket or tucked it inside your shirt. You waited, because opening it was something you did in private, or better yet, at home. I bet you remember that weight in your pocket, that thickness of the envelope pressing against your leg as you finished the last hour of your shift. It meant something. It meant you'd earned it. But what was actually inside those envelopes? And why did companies pay in cash instead of checks? The answer tells you a lot about how different life was back then. Inside the envelope, let's talk numbers for a second. In 1972, the average factory worker made somewhere between $140 and $200 a week, depending on the job and the overtime. That doesn't sound like much today, but back then, that was real money. A gallon of gas cost about 36 cents. A loaf of bread was 25 cents. You could feed a family of 4 for a week on maybe $1.30 or $35 if you were careful. So $180 in your pocket meant something. It meant the rent was covered. The car payment was handled. Maybe there was even a little left over for something extra. Now, why cash instead of checks? Simple. A lot of workers didn't have bank accounts. Banks weren't as accessible back then, especially in smaller towns or working-class neighborhoods. And even if you did have an account, cashing a check meant taking time off work to get to the bank before it closed. Most factories ran shifts that made that nearly impossible, so companies paid in cash because it was practical. The worker got his money immediately, no waiting, no hassle. And for the company, it meant fewer complaints about late payments or bounced checks. But there was something else, too, something psychological. When you get paid in cash, you feel the money leaving your hands when you spend it. Every bill you give away is a bill you watched yourself earn. That creates a different relationship with money, a more careful one, a more deliberate one. Kids today will never understand that feeling, the way you'd count those bills slowly, making sure the amount matched what you expected, the way you'd fold them just right before putting them away. That wasn't just habit, that was respect. But the real ritual didn't happen at the factory. It happened later. At home, around the kitchen table, and what took place there. That's where Friday truly meant something. The kitchen table, the drive home on Friday, felt different. You'd have the windows down, maybe the radio playing, but your mind was already at the kitchen table, because that's where the money got divided. In most households, the wife handled the budget. Not because the husband didn't care, but because she knew where every dollar needed to go. She kept track of what was owed, what was due, and what could wait another week. So you'd walk in the door, hand her the envelope, and she'd get to work. First, the rent. That pile went into one envelope, usually kept in a drawer or a lockbox. Then the utilities, electric, gas, water. Each one got its own small stack. Then groceries. Then the car payment, if you had one. Then maybe a little for the kids' school supplies or clothes they'd outgrown. And if there was anything left over, that went into the savings jar. Or maybe, just maybe, it meant dinner out on Saturday night, a real treat. This wasn't budgeting the way people do it now with apps and spreadsheets. This was physical, tangible. You could see exactly how much you had and exactly where it was going. And when the money ran out, it ran out. There was no credit card to fall back on, no overdraft protection, just empty envelopes and another week to wait. Those were different times, tougher in some ways, but there was a clarity to it, a simplicity. You knew what you had, you knew what you owed, and you made it work. Maybe your mother did the same thing, sitting at that table with her own system of envelopes or jars. Maybe you watched her count those bills, her lips moving silently as she added up the numbers. That image stays with you, doesn't it? The unwritten rules now. Here's something people don't talk about much. There were rules around payday, unwritten rules that everyone understood. Rule number 1. You didn't spend your pay before you got home. Sure, some guys would stop at the bar on the way, buy a round or two, but if you were smart, if you had a family counting on you, that envelope stayed sealed until you walked through your own front door. Rule number 2. You didn't borrow against next week's pay. If you ran out of money on Wednesday, you figured it out. You stretched what you had. You didn't go to the foreman asking for an advance unless it was a real emergency. And even then, people talked. Rule number 3. You didn't discuss what you made, not with the guys at the next station, not with your neighbors. Salaries were private. What a man earned was between him, his wife, and God. Asking someone what they made. That was considered rude, almost offensive. These rules weren't written down anywhere, but everybody knew them. They were part of the culture, part of what it meant to be a working man in that era. And you know what? They created a kind of discipline, a structure. When you can't swipe a card or tap your phone to buy something, you think twice. You ask yourself if you really need it. That's a habit that sticks with you even decades later. But not every Friday went smoothly. Sometimes the envelope was lighter than expected. Sometimes there was a problem. And what happened then revealed a lot about who a man really was. When the numbers didn't add up, every now and then, you'd open that envelope and something would be wrong. Maybe the overtime didn't get counted. Maybe there was a deduction you didn't expect. Maybe the company just made a mistake. When that happened, you had a choice. Let it go and hope it got fixed next week. Or go to the payroll office and speak up. Most men spoke up. Not in a loud way, not making a scene, but quietly, firmly. Because that money wasn't just numbers, it was hours. Hours away from your family. Hours in the heat or the cold. Hours standing on your feet until they ached. If a company shorted you, even by $5, that was $5 your family wouldn't have. $5 that could mean the difference between a full tank of gas and running on fumes all week. So you'd go to the office, show them your time card, point out the error, and usually it got fixed. The next week, your envelope would have the missing amount. But that week, you made do with less. Those moments tested you. They showed you how thin the line was between getting by and falling behind, and they reminded you why every shift mattered, why clocking in on time mattered, why staying late when they asked mattered. Because at the end of the week, all of that turned into something real, something you could hold. But cash paydays weren't just about individual families. They shaped entire communities. And what happened on Friday nights in factory towns? That's a story most people have forgotten. Friday night in a factory town. If you lived in a factory town in the early 70s, you knew that Friday night was different from every other night of the week. Main Street came alive. The grocery store stayed open late because they knew workers would be coming in to stock up. The corner bar filled with men who'd just finished their shifts, sharing a drink before heading home. The diner served more dinners on Friday than any other night, and the gas station, there'd be a line because everyone needed to fill up for the weekend, and everyone had the cash to do it. This wasn't just commerce, it was community. The same faces you saw at the factory, you'd see at the store. The woman behind the counter at the market knew your wife's name. The guy pumping your gas might be your neighbor's son working his way through school. Money moved through that town like blood through a body. A man earned it at the plant. He spent it at local businesses. Those businesses paid their workers, and those workers spent it somewhere else. The whole system was connected, local, visible. That feeling of connection, it's hard to find now, but back then, you felt it every Friday. You were part of something. Your work mattered not just to your family, but to everyone around you. But things were already starting to change. By the mid-70s, some companies began experimenting with a different system, and what seemed like a small convenience would eventually transform everything. The shift to paper, it started slowly. First, the bigger corporations, then the medium-sized plants. By the late 70s, more and more companies were switching from cash to checks. The reasons made sense on paper. Checks were safer, no risk of robbery on payday, easier to track, simpler for accounting. And for workers with bank accounts, it meant they didn't have to worry about carrying cash around. But something got lost in that transition. When you get a check, you have to take it somewhere, deposit it, wait for it to clear. The money becomes abstract, a number in an account. You don't feel it the same way. You don't count it with your hands. You don't watch your wife divide it up on the kitchen table. And later, when direct deposit became the norm, the money just appeared. No envelope, no ritual. No moment where you held a week of your life in your hands and decided what it meant. Life was tougher back then. No question. But there was something honest about cash. Something real. When you paid your rent with bills you'd earned, you knew exactly what that apartment cost. When you bought groceries with money, you'd counted yourself. You understood the weight of every purchase. That connection between work and reward. It's more abstract now, and maybe that's progress. But if you remember the old way, you know something was lost. Maybe you still remember the last time you got paid in cash, the last Friday when an envelope had your name on it. That memory stays with you, doesn't it? Like the end of an era you didn't realize was ending. What the envelope really meant, let's step back for a moment and think about what that pay envelope actually represented. It wasn't just money, it was proof. Proof that you'd shown up, that you'd done the work, that you'd put in the hours when you could have stayed home. It was physical evidence of your effort, your discipline, your commitment to the people depending on you. When a man handed that envelope to his wife, he wasn't just giving her cash. He was showing her what the week had meant. Every blister on his hands, every tired morning, every time he pushed through when he wanted to quit. All of that was folded up inside that manila paper. And when she took it and started dividing it up, she was doing her part, making sure it stretched far enough, making sure the family stayed on solid ground. It was a partnership, wordless in many ways, but powerful. That ritual at the kitchen table, it wasn't just about budgeting. It was about trust, about two people working together toward something bigger than themselves, about building a life dollar by dollar, week by week. Kids today will never understand why their grandfather gets uncomfortable with credit cards, or why their grandmother still keeps cash in the house. But now you know, it's not about the money. It's about what the money meant and how it felt to earn it the hard way. The sound of Friday. There's one more thing I want you to remember. The sounds. Friday at the factory had its own soundtrack. The whistle that marked the end of the shift, the clang of locker doors as men grabbed their things, the shuffle of work boots on concrete floors, the murmur of voices, tired but lighter than usual. And then outside, car engines starting up, someone calling out to a buddy across the parking lot, the crunch of gravel under tires as trucks pulled away. If you close your eyes, maybe you can still hear it. That sound of relief, that sound of completion, that sound of a week finally over and money finally earned. Those sounds are gone now. Most of those factories are quiet or torn down. The parking lots are empty. The men who filled them have retired or passed on, but the memory remains. In their children, in their grandchildren, in everyone who ever watched a father come home on Friday with that envelope in his pocket and a tired smile on his face. Life was tougher then, but simpler. A man knew what he was worth because he could count it every Friday. A family knew what they had because they could see it spread across the kitchen table. There was no pretending, no hiding behind credit, no numbers on a screen that could disappear with a click. Just real money for real work. And a ritual that reminded everyone what mattered most. If you remember those days, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you don't, maybe you understand a little better now why the people who lived it never quite forgot. That Friday feeling, that weight in your pocket, that moment when the money was yours. Some things you just don't get back. If this brought back memories, I'd love to hear about them. What did Friday mean in your family? What rituals do you remember? Sometimes the best stories come from the people who lived them.